Traditional Eastern medical orientations really had a view of health as being more mind, body, and spirit intertwined, which I think is a lot more accurate.
For me, freedom of choice is the most important aspect of freedom.
As you asked the question, I was trying to notice, and it feels like drinking a cup of warm chai. Like there's a immediate softening all the way down, like from my neck right down to my toes.
What part of yourself did you feel you had to quiet down or hide to stay safe or accepted?
I bought a flashlight, hoping this little object would shine light into all the dark places, would be a spotlight, that I could stand in my new home.
What worries you most about where society is heading?
I think that, like many people who talk about issues of power and belonging and exclusion and racism and, systems, we come to those topics because of having the opposite experience.
Why did Fire and Silence feel like the book you needed to write now? Welcome back. Today's guest is Annahid Dashtgard, author, speaker, leadership advisor, and one of the most thoughtful voices on belonging, identity, and what it really costs to lead in a world that wasn't built for everyone. Annahid is the author of Breaking the Ocean, Bones of Belonging, and her upcoming book, Fire and Silence, which will be released later this February. Her work sits at the intersection of lived experience and leadership, where personal stories meet systems, power, and responsibility. What I appreciate most about Annahid's writing is that it's honest without being performative and reflective without being detached. She doesn't just talk about belonging. She shows us what happens when it's missing and what it takes to rebuild it without losing yourself in the process. This conversation is about identity, leadership, immigration, silence, courage, and the long road to wholeness. It's about what changes as we age, what we unlearn, and what we carry forward. Annahid, welcome to Beyond the Summit.
Oh, thanks, Amir. It's my pleasure to be here. And just those minor topics that we're here to talk about.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. So before we go anywhere, I just want to say congratulations on Fire and Silence. It feels like this book is arriving at a very specific moment for you and for the whole world. I'm really grateful you're here.
Oh, thank you, Amir. That means a lot coming from you.
Thank you. I want to start somewhere very human before the books, before the ideas. When you hear the word belonging, what happens in your body before any thoughts show up?
That's such a great question. As you asked the question, I was trying to notice, and it feels like drinking a cup of warm chai. Like there's a immediate softening all the way down, like from my neck right down to my toes. And to me, it captures that feeling of how we feel when we're with our closest family and friends. That feeling of just we're not self-critical, we're not self-conscious. This I think about a Mary Oliver poem where she put it as the soft animal of our body can just do what it needs to do. And
That
we
makes a lot
know,
of
and I
sense.
think all of us immediately know when we're in an environment where we feel a sense of belonging or where it's possible, and also where it is not.
I hear how much of this lives beyond language. I'm curious where that started.
Well, I think that, like many people who talk about issues of power and belonging and exclusion and racism and, systems, we come to those topics because of having the opposite experience. So I talk a lot about belonging because at a very deep level, I know what it feels like to not belong. Like yourself, like many people probably listening to this podcast, I came to Canada as an outsider, as an immigrant. I arrived here in the early 80s to a very white part of the country, Alberta, sometimes referred to as the Texas of Canada. And in those days, especially, there was a lot of racism and it wasn't named. There was very little societal understanding of it. And I remember feeling very very self-conscious when we went out in public. I faced a lot of bullying and exclusion in my school environment as well as in community activities. And again, because it wasn't I didn't have a language to be able to identify what was happening, I assumed that the problem was me. And my journey toward belonging has been over many, many years starting to understand, the history of the country I live in, the history of racism and sexism. What are the forces that set up and influence the society we're part of in this given moment? What is not about me at all, and what part can I play in creating more inclusive spaces where everyone can belong?
I love that. So, do you remember any specific kind of vivid memory, realizing you were different or didn't fully fit?
Well, I have a very particular memory of my father picking us up because we moved from Iran and then we were in England for a couple years and moving around. That was not easy by any means. And then my father had come ahead to Canada and he picked us up from the airport when we first moved. And we stopped off at the 7-Eleven at the top of our street before we went to the house that would be our home for many years. And I remember my father said he would buy each of us a little thing that we wanted. And I chose a flashlight. And I remember because looking back, it feels almost like a metaphor. Like I bought a flashlight hoping this little object would shine light into all the dark places, would be a spotlight, that I could stand in my new home. And it was just the opposite. And the memories I have of those early years, because they traumatizing for me, it's still hard to think about. I know that after a few months when somebody new would start in the class, they would make eye contact, say hello at the beginning of the day, but by the end of the day would have learned that it was no longer, okay to be anywhere near me because it would mean their own social status was lowered. I remember being spat on by younger kids, white kids,
Believe
who I was one of a handful of like brown, black kids in the school at that time. It was so we definitely stood out. And early on, for me, because I didn't have anywhere to put all those emotions of fear and anxiety and what's happening and shame, it came out in my body. And so I developed a lot of OCD, obsessive compulsive type behaviors as a way of coping with what was going on.
So sorry to hear that even after these many years. I believe those early moments stay with us longer than we expect.
Oh, did they ever? Yeah.
And they quietly shape how we move through the world. This is exactly what I see happen to you. So, what part of yourself did you feel you had to quiet down or hide to stay safe or accepted?
Well, that's a really good question. Well, like many Iranians, I mean, culturally, I would say it's a culture of being very generous, very outspoken, very kind of loud. And I don't want to generalize, but I'm saying there's a cultural set point. And I certainly embody those qualities. So I write in the book, my first book is a memoir, Breaking the Ocean. And I talk about, you know, coming to Canada was a double loss. It was a loss of confidence because of the racism and all of that, and health because of the racism I experienced here. But it was also a double loss because I lost the girl I had been in Iran. I lost the connection to language, to family. I didn't talk anymore to my family once we left. All of those qualities that made me quite Persian in my orientation there was no space for them. So it was quite night and day, I would say. I became, I would say, silent and appeasing for many years in public, and at home, that's where my anger would come out more.
I believe that's such an honest answer. Many people listening will recognize themselves in that. I can see that clearly. And often that hiding has consequences later. Was there a moment later in life when your body or mind forced you to confront the cost of carrying all that?
Hmm. Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, there's not just one moment. I think there was a series of micro wake-up calls that sort of accumulated, but I think the biggest moment for me was after I had my second child, and I know you haven't been through the experience of childbirth, but as many female identifying people listening would sort of relate to, it just kind of shatters your sense of self. It's unlike I mean, it's a real rite of passage, particularly for women, for mothers, and I found myself flooded with memories and feelings, and of course, I was isolated. I didn't have work to rely on, and work, I would say, is, you know, not only does it take attention, but it's also a source of strength, and I didn't have that to rely on. I just it was, yeah, I felt myself flooded with a lot of undealt with emotions, and it took a toll on my own mental health, and it took a toll on my marriage, and this is sort of in my early 40s, and it was at that point that I started to write the memoir, and for me, it was a turning point moment because and I think this is true for a lot of people, when we can tell our story as a first sign of being able to drop the story or to be free of it. And so writing my story and being able to put it in my own terms was very liberating.
I love that. And thank you for naming that. So many people wait until burnout or illness to listen.
Mhm. Yep.
That brings us naturally to health, not as a buzzword, but as survival. When you think about health now, physical, mental, emotional, how has your definition changed over time?
Mhm. The biggest thing for me, and I think in a lot of immigrant communities in particular, we tend to still think of health in just physical terms. And my learning over the years is I think about it in the you know, more traditional Eastern medical orientations really had a view of health as being more mind, body, and spirit intertwined, which I think is a lot more accurate. I think a lot of people that people don't often choose to move to a new country unless the conditions in their home country are horrible, unsurvivable, and so we come with all kinds of unprocessed losses, fears, emotions, and then on top of that are all the things that we encounter in the new place. And that really I think there's a lot of unnamed mental health struggles generally in society, particularly in a lot of immigrant cultures that come out in all kinds of unhealthy, toxic behaviors.
I appreciate how layered that is. It's not just about fixing symptoms. And I believe one of the reasons that you learn Chinese medicine is for the same reason.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that was a turning point in terms of being able to have a language again for, yeah, a bunch of
Yeah,
different symptoms that we don't have words for in Western culture.
great. Especially when your work asks you to show up fully for others.
Yeah. Amir, this question of health directly connects to leadership because, a lot of people think that a good leader is one that can fulfill the tasks, but that's the easy part. Like people get promoted into leadership or management roles because they're good at what they do. They're good at strategy or vision or getting the job done. But when people, staff, talk about what a good leader is, it's always about how the person makes them feel and really to be the kind of leader that supports others, that models a good tone, that is able to respond to crises in a way that creates more inclusion. You really have to figure your own shit out. You have to deal with your trauma. You gotta deal with your own health and mental health issues because if you don't, it will come out in the workplace.
Talking about leaders and leadership, how do leaders, especially women and racialized leaders, misunderstand health in high responsibility roles? Because you are the absolute expert in that area.
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of racialized people, women, can often come into leadership, often, I think, with a posture of appeasement, because that has been what's allowed one to survive and get by. In other words, I'll play the game. I'll be better than those around me. I'll be silent about what challenges come up. I will swallow the micro inequities or the exclusions, and I'll just be really good. I'll try and beat the system on its own terms. And I don't think that works very well. I don't want to say that we always need to be calling everything out, but I think that being a good leader means getting doing our own personal work so we can discern what can I just let go? What should I be silent about here? And where are other occasions where I need to speak up or challenge something or hold on to what's really important because this is the reason I'm in this role. And if we're in survival mode, we can't discern anything and we're not really effective. And I just see a lot of people of color and other people in marginalized identities not having any impact in the organizations they're part of because they've lost who they are to get there. That is not success. If I have to lose or give up so much of who I am to be in a
Mm.
leadership role, what the fuck? Like, what's the payoff for that?
That's so powerful and such an important reframe. And the awareness feels closely tied to your first book. When you were writing Breaking the Ocean, who were you really writing for?
I think nonfiction, particularly memoir, is always written primarily for ourselves, all the selves we have been growing up. And then I think, of course, I was writing it for others that I knew were part of my own immigrant community, but also others, people that had come here under different conditions, but also anyone that feels like an outsider. And broadly speaking, I think many people feel like an outsider at some point or another. Breaking the Ocean is really the story about how do you move from always feeling like the outsider to feeling like you deserve to be at the center and putting yourself there and being able to, what's the word? Even when you're experiencing resistance from people around you, having the skill, the inner skills to be able to go, no, I'm not giving up on this, or I'm not going to be silent about that. This is why I'm here. Yes, I am this good, and I'm going to occupy the space that I have fought so hard for.
That intention comes through. I feel sincere, not curated, and telling the truth comes with a cost. What did it cost you personally or emotionally to tell that story publicly?
Well, that's a really good point, Amir, that if we do choose to speak up, may create temporary discomfort. When I wrote that first book, I was taken off guard. I thought I would get more support from people I knew than was the case. I mean, certainly it made like neighbors, people in my community that I kind of knew, I think, uncomfortable because I was talking about an uncomfortable topic. But at the same time, the people that I wrote that book for really showed up. And so today I just finished the last session of the BIPOC Leader Lab, which is a leadership program for racialized leaders from across sectors. And it ran all year. And we just had our last session. In fact, I just finished an hour ago. And uh, in closing, every single one of those people talked about how meaningful the experience was, how they feel. One of the biggest things everyone said was, wow, I can really see how my identity isn't a barrier, but is a source of strength. And you know, I'm not gonna, I'm not, I don't need to feel like a victim. Like I can just really hold on to who I am. So I feel like it was really hard. I really struggled for the first year after writing that book. But now I can see actually it clarified who my leadership is for. And those that are not ready to hear the message and the story I have to offer, like that's okay. I don't need to be talking to them. And I think that's true for any of us. Like, our leadership doesn't need to be for everybody necessarily, or not everyone has to like, you know, what we're saying, as long as we're clear.
We rarely talk about, what happens after courage. Thank you for naming that. One idea that really stayed with me is how you frame reconciliation. You describe reconciliation as work, not comfort. What does that look like in real life?
I think reconciliation is a process of bringing together pieces that have been shattered apart because of under pressure, things shatter. And I think first and foremost, it means internally. There was a whole journey around reconciliation that I did inside myself. I mentioned earlier, like the process of writing really was a huge process in itself of reconciliation, because every time I wrote a scene from the past, I was reconciling that memory or reconciling the feelings associated with that memory. So being able to bring that memory back into cohesion rather than feeling like, oh, I can't think about that because it was really hard and it makes me feel X, Y, and Z ways. But it was also then a process that happened externally where I had conversations with people in my own friend circle that I hadn't had in the past. Some friends I am not friends with anymore. Others I've become closer with. So there was that reconciliation, family members that I hadn't. So that process of reconciliation happened in my personal life. But then I also think the book, like many stories, has played a role in a larger cultural, national conversation we're having right now about how we manage, how we integrate diverse, and I'm putting diverse in quotation marks because I don't identify as a diverse human, but I know, like, according to some definitions, but how do we integrate these diverse cultural communities that are part of what it means to be Canadian, that are not getting integrated so well, that are still, I would say, separate, shattered pieces. So I think of reconciliation, the book, my work is in the world through Anima Leadership, my company. We've been doing this work for 20 years and we focus on equity, diversity, inclusion in systems. My work is about how to bring together differences in a way that makes the whole stronger. So I think about reconciliation as happening on all these different levels.
That honesty is refreshing. It feels earned, not idealized. Now let's talk about your second book, In the Bones of Belonging. You focus on everyday moments. Why do those moments matter so much?
I think when we tell the truth about something deep, like very ordinary, but we go deeply into it, it becomes universal. And so that book is, like you said, it's it's kind of 10 longer essays, each one exploring a different theme of belonging. What does it mean to belong to the land, in our own body, to a marriage, to a culture, to the world? And then in between are all these shorter vignettes, which, like you said, take a moment and kind of deeply explore in that moment. Why was that moment so emotional? Why was it influential? What came up? And in trying to do that, I think it becomes a universal moment. So there's one story I wrote called Names, and it's a short piece, but it's about reflecting on how I, um, after we moved, gave up Annahid to go by Anna. And I remember the exact moment in grade 9 where the teacher got my name wrong yet again. And I was so full of shame and embarrassment. I said, no, my name is Anna. And so between 14 and 28, I went by Annahid Dashtgard. And if you Google Annahid Dashtgard versus Annahid Dashtgard on Google, you get very different hits. It's kind of funny. But after September 11th happened, I made a conscious choice to reclaim my name because of the racism that was happening and the backlash towards people of Middle Eastern descent. I thought, I'm tired of trying to, like we've talked about, appease and just get by and be the good little Canadian immigrant girl. Like, I'm going to reclaim myself. So my name was the first step in that direction, Annahid. And so, I'm reflecting on what my name has meant to me through my son's eyes. And there's one moment where he he says to we go somewhere and he says to the person, when I say my name is Annahid, he says, "No, her name, like Annahid. I know it's weird, but that's really her name." And I speak to him later that night and explain to him what my name means and why it's important to say people's real names the way they pronounce it. And at the end of the piece is a moment where my I go to pick him up at a friend's house, and I introduce myself, and she says my name wrong back to me. "Oh, Anahid." And my son intervenes and says, "No, her name is Annahid." And
I
how that,
love it.
you know,
So
how
it's so
journey.
beautiful the way you describe things. You make the invisible visible in a way that really lands, which
Uh,
leads directly to wholeness. What does wholeness mean to you now, practically, day to day?
It means being able to do what we feel called to do and say what we feel called to say without policing ourselves
Hmm.
or being so self-critical that we just, I think when we are part of systems that push us to be lesser versions of ourselves, we internalize that voice. So internalized racism is that voice inside us that is constantly double questioning or double guessing, or should I have said that? Was I too much? Was I not enough? And it's constant. And so to me, wholeness is when I can just move through the world like I can take who I am for granted and not have that constant questioning of if I'm enough or if I'm too much, and just let that go.
Lovely. That groundness feels hard-won bridge. Yet systems often resist that kind of wholeness. What do you think?
Percent, I think being a whole human is a threat in and of itself to the systems that we exist within. And, the systems that we're part of have been shaped historically by, I would say, capitalism and the way especially capitalism takes place in this Western world, the hyper capitalism, the hyper emphasis on individualism, um, and then alongside racism and patriarchy. Like these are systems that are systems of separation. They really, they separate men from women, people of color from white people, people that have money from people that don't. And then they create the hierarchy of who is worth more in this system and who is worth less. And to really reclaim a feeling of wholeness in these systems that are meant to pull us apart and stack us against one another is in and of itself is threatening, I think, to those that buy into the system. Um, I am my work in the world is very much trying to create a different system that is really based on much more collaboration and inclusion, and that people are promoted because of merit, because of what they are able to do and what they're able to achieve, rather than how much money they have or what skin color they're in or how much money their parents have. And when we do get into those positions where we may have more influence than others around us, we use our power in a different way, like not to just one-upmanship or take advantage of others, but we use our power in a way that has integrity and dignity and takes into account the benefit of the whole, everybody, everybody's needs, rather than just my selfish, homogenous group that I belong to.
I love that. Very deep and reflective. What emotional labor do you still see going unseen in professional spaces?
Yeah, it, you know, just when you think about a family, any family, family, a lot of different family systems. I don't want to get too much into the theory here, but the idea is that if a family doesn't deal with things that happen to the family, if the family doesn't deal with the loss of immigrating and or the fear of the da 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 or the trauma that happens to some, that affects everyone in the family, if the family doesn't deal with that as a whole, what will often happen is that one person in the family will be the inheritor of all of those feelings, will be the black sheep of the family, will be the one with mental health issues, will be the one that, doesn't succeed because of, becomes the kind of the scapegoat. That same thing happens in workplace systems. So, and usually the scapegoats in the workplace are minoritized people, are people of color, are women.
I think many listeners or those who are watching just felt quite yes hearing that,
Yeah.
and they can relate. And that invisibility is central to Fire and Silence.
Yeah.
Why did Fire and Silence feel like the book you needed to write now?
Yeah. I I have an answer for that, but just to finish that thought around being the scapegoat, I think that knowing that that's going to be the tendency means that we can speak up and advocate for, you know, when the emotional labor of taking on extra work or coaching people behind the scenes because the system isn't supporting them enough, or um uh all the other ways in which we take on extra work, that we can actually advocate for ourselves rather than just accepting it as a cost of, of invisible, of like being in our identity. So I think knowing how to advocate for ourselves is can be really, just again, like in the family, like in my I think I absorbed a lot of undealt with emotions in my family, and rather than just continuing on in that role, I've learned over time to say, well, I think this is what's happening and I will do this, but I'm not going to do all of it, and here's what I need the rest of you to do, and whether people do that or not is their choice. So right, we can do something similar in the workplace rather than just pay the emotional tax, the invisible emotional tax that many people of color are expected to pay. I don't think we have to. There's a choice around that.
You are a co-founder of Anima consultation firm. What makes your services and the way you're consulting, leadership different from other firms that they're doing similar thing, considering what you just mentioned?
I think the biggest difference is where our work comes from. So both myself and my partner Shaquille, who co-founded this, both of us we're both immigrants. He's Pakistani, I'm Persian born. We both grew up as outsiders in different ways. We both you know, kind of worked in community organizers. We understand a lot around power and community and leadership and identity. And Anima Leadership weaves together like that's the name of our company, Anima Leadership. We weave together a lot of the internal systems change pieces like emotional intelligence and neuroscience and purpose and clarity and all those internal with knowledge of external systems, power and systems and organizational change mechanisms. But the biggest thing I'd say is that when we go into work with a group or a system, we do it very authentically rather than in any formulaic way.
My last question is unanswered. Kind of the urgency that you felt to write Fire and Silence now.
Yeah. Well, Fire and Silence, the full title is Fire and Silence, a roadmap for BIPOC leaders. And I I started writing it after I started the BIPOC Leader Lab. This was about 4 or 5 years ago. And it was hearing the conversations with this group of racialized leaders from across North America who were sharing stories of overt and invisible experiences of racism that I just thought, this is biggest the biggest demographic of people coming into leadership roles right now are racialized people. A generation ago, it was women coming into male dominant workplaces. And there's so many books and resources thrown to help women leaders in the workplace be successful. Whereas racialized leaders who are coming into leadership roles, there's virtually nothing to support. And yet the barriers are just as significant as they were for female leaders a generation ago. So I wanted to write a book that would name the barriers and the patterns, the invisible patterns of racism that play out in the workplace. I wanted to offer concrete strategies for having impact. I wanted to talk about, what it means to really the internal like heal and manage your triggers and self-regulate in a workplace environment. And lastly, when we get into positions of influence, how we use power differently. So the book really is a roadmap. And the last thing I'll say about this book is I really started to write it in earnest after Trump got elected for the second time. So a year ago was when I went like, I have to get this thing out. And I think it's very powerful. And one of the biggest, most meaningful testimonials I've received was from Anil Arora, who is Canada's former chief statistician. He ran Stats Canada for many, many years, and he now teaches at the Harvard Kennedy School of Governance. And he said, everyone needs to read this book. And I wish I had come across it at an earlier time in my career. That's what I feel like that book is. I think if I had come across this book 10 years ago, 20 years ago, it would have made a big, big difference for me. And I hope it does for others.
I love that. That urgency feels very real. What does fire represent for you at this stage of your life?
The courage to speak out when needed. And, fire and silence, to me, they're opposite energies. And leadership really is about knowing when to use what. And they can both be, yeah, I'll just leave it at that.
That's a very mature relationship with power. What does silence cost leaders over time?
Well, I think we gradually lose parts of what make us who we are, what make us so powerful if we give up our truth to stay silent over and over and over again. At a certain point, the price is too high.
That answer alone will resonate deeply. Let's talk about wealth, not just money, but capacity. When you hear the word wealth, what does it actually mean to you?
Hmm. A sense of abundance that even if we face temporary hardships or a hard period in the world, I mean, this feels like a hard period in the world right now, that we still can remember our sense of purpose, that we can still remember the good stuff, all the gifts we've been given. I think about ancestors that have paid a high price for me to just be here doing the work I'm doing. That that gives me a sense of wealth that maybe other people don't take for granted because they just don't think about it.
Anahid, do you know what I love about that definition? So it expands the conversation beyond numbers,
Mhm.
especially since financial independence often shapes freedom. Do you agree?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
So, what do people misunderstand about money, power, and independence, especially in marginalized communities?
Well, I think in a lot of immigrant, other marginalized communities, because there's often a survivor mentality, there's an overemphasis on achieving and doing well by getting traditional jobs and earning a certain amount of money. I mean, I certainly felt it. My father, I was always I would say, an artist by temperament, but I started my career doing business at Queen's, which is the most elite white university in Canada. And it was such a bad fit for me. And it took me a lot of years to let go of the messages that I should be a doctor, an engineer, or a lawyer, or earn a certain amount of money to be considered as a success in my adult life. And I just, I see a lot of people that have pursued that path that are just not nice people, are unhappy, are struggling in their marriages or in their careers. So I would say that, yes, we want to be realistic about what we need to live, but we need to consider that as one factor along with many other factors in terms of how we go about defining success for ourselves. And to not default to this survival message of it's got to be three professions and it has to be this amount of money, because that is such a narrow definition. And you know what? We deserve more.
I agree. So that nuance is so important. It avoids shame and blame, which bring us to freedom. What's the difference between visibility and real power?
hmm I think real power is being able to choose what I want on my own terms versus an artificial definition of power, which can sometimes look like material success. But inside myself, I feel like I'm falling apart. I'm struggling with health. My marriage is falling apart. I don't have anyone close to me. I feel really isolated. So I guess what I'm saying is, like, if we don't feel an internal sense of freedom to choose what our lives look like, then it's really not freedom at all.
That distinction alone, I believe, could change how people pursue success. This podcast exists around the idea that health and financial independence are foundations for freedom. What does freedom mean to you now? You mentioned, ability to do whatever you want on your own term. Any specific definition that you consider as absolute freedom for yourself? Because I believe everyone's definition of freedom is unique and different.
Mhm. For me, I would define freedom as the ability to trust my own gut on things. It's taken me a long time to separate out all the external voices and all the shoulds that I've absorbed in my, like, inside myself. I should do this for this reason. I should do that for, and the more I follow my own instinct on which clients I should work with, which I should say no to, whether I should go in this direction or that direction, the more I follow my own gut, the more satisfaction and richness I get. So, but I define that as freedom because it's just taken so long to even have that voice appear and to be able to listen to it. And often, you know what's funny, Amir? The more I listen to that voice, it 90% of the time comes with material success attached to it. Like there's more financial benefit as well. Isn't that interesting?
It is.
Whereas when I go with what I think I should be doing, like it's like usually it's a lot more work and less actual, like it's so, yeah, it's so interesting.
That's why we need constant reminder. Okay. So your definition, feels deeply earned. I can see
Mhm.
it took you a long time. What
Do
belief
you
did you
define it,
hold?
Amir? How do you define it for yourself in this moment? Because I'm sure that you have many, like many of us, we might answer it differently at different times, but how do you define freedom for yourself?
So for me, freedom of choice is the most important aspect of freedom.
Mhm.
To be able to choose what I want, when I want, how I want, and who do I want with.
Yes, that's beautifully put. That should
Thank
be
you.
a T-shirt slogan. I would buy it.
Thank you.
When is your book gonna come out?
Soon. So you motivated me to work on it. What belief did you hold years ago that you've had to unlearn it?
That I should be a doctor, a lawyer, or an engineer, and a certain amount of money every year to be a success at life.
I love that.
I define success now as do find the thing that you are most passionate about and good at, and have the courage to go after that. and you'll figure it out. You'll be successful, and if it's not that exact thing, it'll morph into the next step, and, you'll find your way.
Yeah, unlearning takes courage, not weakness, and you've done it. So, what worries you most about where society is heading?
I really worry about that these days. I worry that there's not enough commonality to keep us, like, tied together in one civil society. Like, civil society has always had many different aspects, but those differences today are being weaponized. And the groups sharing the same society or the same geographical, like in Canada, think of, well, in the States especially today, all those differences are getting weaponized. There's more polarization, and there's not a common glue to hold that society together anymore. So the common religion has been, there's, which used to be Christianity, has now watered down, and there's no sort of, so that's not a unifying factor. Democracy is getting watered down, so that's not a unifying factor. The education now is so watered, like, so I just think, well, what's going to hold people together? And I really worry about the possibility of civil war in the United States and how that's going to impact us here in Canada. I hope to
And
God that there's a movement, um, and you're starting to see it coming up now, that Trump will get pushed out before his 4 years are done. That's my hope, because he's now affecting the whole world and breaking apart democracies, not just in the US, but across the world. And it's very, very, very dangerous. Very
it is
dangerous.
very complicated time. I cannot agree more. And on the flip side, what still gives you hope?
I believe at the end of the day, I do believe there's more goodness in people and in communities than there is maliciousness. And I think it just often needs to be harnessed. So, and, it's not as much reported in the news, but there's a lot of examples of that as well.
Right.
Mhm.
That balance feels very honest.
Yeah,
Someone, yep, please.
I think we have more good in ourselves than, well,
I agree.
people have more good in themselves than they do the negative stuff, and as a society, we have more good built in than we do the negative stuff, and I think we just have to keep supporting the good to come forward. I think a lot of, whether we are good people or bad people is about context. And so I just keep thinking about, okay, how do I support structures and processes and policies and laws and organize people so we can keep supporting people to show up in good ways rather than ways that are not as kind.
Love it. If someone watching or listening feels unseen or exhausted right now, what would you want them to know?
Don't give up, especially if it feels like things are hard, because what you are learning right now is going to be key to what your future self needs to have the impact you're going to have. And we need you. Our
Beautiful.
society, our community needs you. Even if you can't see it right now, I know it.
Right. Is there anything that you rarely talk about or you wanted to talk about it for a long time? If there is, this is the time.
One of the things I talk about in my book is that many racialized leaders or many people from minoritized backgrounds, one of the superpowers we have is that bone deep knowledge of how necessary community is for survival, how we need our family members, how we need our neighbors, how we need people in our organizations. Like, we know that because we wouldn't have gotten to where we are if we didn't have community to grab hold of. And I think That's a very powerful knowledge, and I think our world really needs that reminder right now. So whatever ways we can offer that forward, bring food into the workplace, offer a kind word to someone, especially during this holiday season, go out of our way, send a little written note to somebody, even anonymously. Those little things matter, and they matter in this time period more than ever. And so I just encourage those of us that have benefited from the kindness of others to really pay that forward in this next year.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing that. And finally, after everything you've lived, written, and learned, what does going beyond the summit mean to you?
Going beyond the summit. Going beyond the summit to me means even if you've achieved whatever goal you've set out for yourself, to keep going and to continue learning and growing and setting yourself, you know, the next goal or the next objective, or uh, that we are each more capable of much more than I think that we often think we are. So
Lovely.
get to the, there's many things that I looked up and I thought, this is, the next unachievable thing. And then I get there and it's like, so I think going beyond the summit is kind of a metaphor for what it means to just be human. We're constantly growing, constantly evolving, and the journey is never.
So powerful. Thank you. Anahit, thank you so much for your honesty, your generosity, and your clarity.
Thanks for having me, Amir. Your listening and your empathy and your wisdom is very evident, and it's been a real pleasure to be talking to you.
Thank you so much.